observe the process of life. To observe the process of life, we don't need a long span of time. Life happens over time on this planet. But to observe the process of life takes less than a split second. Life is continuously happening, the same process over and over again. What we use that process for, what we make with that process, what we produce from this process, is constantly changing. But that's not the process of life. The process of life is how life becomes from nothing something tangible. Not tangible to the imagination. The imagination doesn't notice life. The imagination only notices the forms created by life. But tangible to the intelligence that is observing itself in silence. Tangible because it is this process that is forming this intelligence. And so to observe the process of life is to observe the most remote, incredible reality that you exist. If we come to look at reality logically from a rational perspective, you have no chance of existing. And yet, there's the stubborn reality that we are facing, that you exist. And so to observe this reality is to observe the process of life. The process of life makes you exist. It's a continuous process that's running in a loop. It's constantly recreating itself. And while it's recreating itself, it's creating you in the process. To observe the process of life is to not be concerned about the form life is taking. The forms are always changing. The forms are dressing the process. They are not the process. Anything we can observe with the senses is not the process. The senses themselves are a result of the process. The process of life gives us access to life itself, physically, and the knowledge of the process of life gives us access to life spiritually. If we don't know the process of life, then we're concerned with the forms. When we're concerned with the forms, we lose access to life. The forms are not alive. The forms are a representation of life. They're a symbol They're not the thing itself. Life is behind you, not in front of you. Life is behind you, giving you power, making you you. That's life. Nothing you can see or perceive is life. Everything you can see or perceive is a dress for life. There is reality, and there is our perception of reality. Emes, reality, ve'emuna, perception of reality. The power a human being has in reality is in some dimensions infinite. But that power becomes available when it is also realized in perception. A power that's in reality that has not been realized in perception is not available to the one perceiving. It's emes, but there is no emuna. And so reality is continuously available. It was available to our forefathers, and it's available to us now. Perception is very different. Perception is fluid. What was available to our forefathers is very different than what's available to us. And so in order to come closer, to bring perception closer to reality, we want to clean our lens. The lens through which we perceive. So we come back to perceiving the process of life. The forms that life is taking on, the information coming in from the senses, go out of focus. And the focus is on the reality that you are the end of a process that becomes you. That process is not visible to the imagination, but the intelligence knows it's there, because the intelligence knows itself. It knows of its own existence. And that's proof that there's a process that makes it be. So allow all of you to return to a place that is formless, not in the sense that there are no forms, but in the sense that it doesn't matter what those forms are. They're all the same thing. They're all forms of life. They're all forms the same being is dressing up in. So we want to focus on the being and less on the form. The forms may be what they may be, but the one that is becoming all of them wants to become aware of his own existence. When the perception can be filled with the formless, then all of you can be you at the same time. Because as long as you're perceiving any form, some of you is dressed up as that form, because that's the nature of perception. Perception is you dressing up as the things you're perceiving. Your life force is what you're perceiving. You are creating a perception, meaning part of you is perceiving, the other part of you is dressed as what you're perceiving. You're always perceiving yourself. There's no one else that you can perceive. Course. But whatever you're dressing yourself as is taking up energy. That energy is stored in the forms. In the forms that are present in your perception. And then there's less of you. But to realize the formless is not to realize something that doesn't exist, it's to realize something that always exists. It's just formless. That's the nature of it. It doesn't have a manifestation in space or in time or even in consciousness. It's the source of all those things. And that formless is the one that becomes all the forms. If we're reading, that form that we're dressing up in is constantly changing as we're going through the words. Now, as we're listening, the formless is becoming all the forms that the words are dressing it up in. Everything that's coming in from the senses is bringing additional forms into perception. All forms of the same life force. It's our own preferences that cause us to embrace some forms while we want to eliminate others. But all forms are the same one, and are objectively just another form of the formless. So we turn to a place where the formless is more important than the form. The formless is always more important than the form in reality. But the formless is not always more important than the form in perception. So we want to align perception with reality by remembering the formless. The formless is the process that creates you, the process of life itself. Life itself is worth more than everything that's available within life. Life is the container of all those things. So recognize the true nature of the relationship between the one that's experiencing life and the forms that are entertaining it. Even what we might perceive as the body itself is really not the body. What we're perceiving is a form that we're projecting based on our expectation of what our body should feel like. And that expectation has to do with many things that are not directly related to what we're feeling, but they have a psychological impact on how we're feeling. And so the perception of the body is simply more forms. Forms that in certain people become a lot more comfortable than in other people. In others it gets a lot more uncomfortable. And all this is based on expectation. It's not based on reality. It's expectation that creates reality. The body creates itself based on expectation. So it's the expectation that's going to decide how much the body is going to prepare of the different chemicals. And it's the expectation that's going to decide how the body is actually going to feel in the future. Because based on these preparations, reality is then going to influence how it feels to have these expectations, whether these expectations are aligned with reality or they collide with reality. And then again comes the expectation of what that's supposed to feel like, and then again come the chemicals to make the body feel that way. And so that loop is again related to the loop between reality and what's being perceived. Reality and perception. Emes and Emunah. Where Emunah, perception, is actually driving the Emes, is actually creating reality. So allow yourself to realize your formless nature. Simply realizing that this is the truth is the beginning of the process. You don't have form, you're dressed up in form. Whatever thought you might think, you're still dressing up the life force in a form. It's not that form, it's something else. It's something that can also be dressed in that form. That's all we've learned from that experiment. So remain in the formless. Return to the formless constantly, as often as you can, to remembering that you're formless, until that becomes your base. Because the way we have our base set up naturally, growing up in the cultures that we're familiar with, the base is just a form that you're used to, or many forms that you're used to. And that's not a solid base. Forms are never representing the full picture. Forms are options. Options that we want to learn how to use for our benefit, for the benefit of mankind, for the benefit of reality itself. Reality has an interest in what's happening in reality. This is why reality is taking place. There's a very big interest involved in what's taking place. And that interest penetrates to every single detail in our individual lives. Every thought, every emotion. Because that interest is very general, it's very global. It's about the well-being of everything that is. And that well-being is dependent on those who have the most choice. And those are the human beings. No one else can move reality so far, so distant from its origin, other than the human being. The human being has the power to interpret, to create perceptions that are extremely distant from reality itself. And those perceptions will create realities of their own, realities that are foreign to reality. Somehow that can and does take place. The reality, that perception, separated from reality, that reality is the source of all conflict. So when we return to the formless, we return to reality. What's reality? That the forms are options, and therefore we have to be careful what forms we use to make sure that they're friendly with reality. We have to be careful how we use forms, how we combine ideas, how we interpret concept, how we formulate beliefs. Because those are going to decide reality. They're going to decide if our nerves can live comfortably together or our nerves are going to argue with each other. Wherever there's conflict, wherever there's separation, wherever there's one becoming many, there's a loss of power. The power of life itself. The formless life, the process that creates life, the invisible one that's more important than everything that's visible. So remember yourself as that.